Right, good morning, everyone. There's probably nothing better than an intro from Pam to burst a girl's ego on a Friday morning. Thank you for that. People quite often ask me what it is that I enjoy about doing this kind of speaking. And my answer is it challenges me. Let me tell you, this morning it challenged me to remember how to put makeup on. I haven't done that thing since February. I am barefoot though. You've got to keep your lockdown standards have got to be maintained. So, catching feelings. I'm a fan of managing expectations right up front. So let me start by telling you what you aren't getting this morning. There'll be no hearts, no bunnies, no rainbows, no holding of the hands, no singing of the kumbaya, even if Uncle Cyril would allow us to. What you are getting is an unvarnished look at emotional intelligence in the context of software engineering. So because we're talking emotions, let's start with a bit of fear factor.
Smoother than a fresh drop skitty. I'm too hot, hot day. Call the police and the fireman. I'm too hot, hot day. Make a dragon wanna retire, man. I'm too hot, hot day. Say my name, you know who I am. I'm too hot, hot day. And my band bow down, money break it down. Girls hit ya.
So if we weren't all about to die of the plague, and we were in the same place, I would say, turn to the person next to you and give them a hug. Because I reckon even the toughest among us find the prospect of the sentient robot army a little disconcerting. If you went to DevConf last year, you would have seen those video clips in Cliff David's keynote address on the future of the modern software developer. He followed that up with a live quantum programming demo, but I'm skipping that stuff today. It's a bit basic for you guys. Yeah. The point he made, though, with those videos was right on the money. It's changing fast, and it's going with or without us. But we know that, right? I mean, we spend our days up to our elbows in the ones and zeros of automating our client businesses. So much so that I think we forget how much our own industry has changed. When last did you write machine code or build a driver? And I mean for a client project, not your Raspberry Pi. In a few years, there will be no one left on the floor who remembers what it was like to code without an IDE. Yeah, AI isn't going to replace software devs just yet, but what will happen, and what is already happening, is the automation of the grunt work. 89% of surveyed enterprise dev teams have got a level of automated deployment in place. 80% of automated QA, 68% have continuous integration in place, and the fearless 12% have got CD. Automation in our world really means nothing different to what it does in any other industry. Because once you've automated the busyness out of a job, our value lies in doing the things that the machines can't. We bring creativity, humor. On a good day, we can multitask. Only on a good day, though. We can apply ethics. And most importantly, we offer emotional intelligence. EQ is, without a doubt, the career currency of our futures. We're facing the terrifying prospect of having to interact with one another and actually having to be quite good at it. So if your inner introvert has died a little bit, like mine does, hearing that, the good news is that unlike IQ, EQ can be learned. The bad news is it's so rare, it's practically a superpower, so we probably need to get learning. So when we talk about EQ, what sort of skills are we referring to? Teamwork. The ability to work in a group of people in a way that furthers the goals of that team as a whole, rather than just yours as an individual. Communication. The ability to listen for understanding, not just a right of reply, and being willing and able to speak openly and honestly in a way that builds bonds, even when the subject matter is difficult. And empathy, the read the room skill. People get lost on this one, so let's be absolutely clear on what empathy is and isn't. It's not pity, it's not sympathy, it isn't even necessarily compassion. It's not liking everybody, it's not pretending to agree with everyone just to keep the peace. It is definitely not weakness, and it doesn't prevent you taking a strong position on something. What it is a cognitive understanding of someone else's circumstances and the ability to respond appropriately and constructively to that. So at this point, I could chuck the rest of the psychology textbook at you, and we could analyze the science behind why EQ is vital for career success and actually an important key to better mental health, but I swear I can hear the snoring starting already. So instead, let's have a look at some of the problems that we face in our industry and how honing a few EQ skills can help us address them. I'm going to start with one that, particularly this year, on some level, we can all relate to: burnout. Over the years, I've been to loads of conference talks that had ended up standing room only. Sometimes the room was too small, sometimes the speaker had a killer reputation, sometimes that guy was promising to fly his drones with fruit. That's the 1 o'clock show, you don't want to miss that. But never for a soft skills talk. That was until I heard husband and wife duo Rian and Tanya Duplessis talk about burnout in software dev. Wow. We were crammed into that room like the emotionally scarred sardines we apparently are. Tanya is an industrial psychologist, and Rian himself was recovering from burnout at that point, so they were pretty well qualified for the talk. And it was fantastic. It was honest, it was thought-provoking, it was everything it should have been. But I spent most of it looking around that room, wondering what we are doing so badly wrong in this industry that that topic resonated with so many people. And of course, worse, if that was a representative sample, how many hundreds, if not thousands more of us were out there? And that talk contained a couple of wake-up calls for me personally as a leader. When Rian spoke about burning out, he described one of the biggest contributors to his burnout as being the relentless pressure to know everything. He had to be an expert in his project's current tech. He had to be able to lead his team well. He had to be on top of all the new and emerging stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot. And sure, In this industry, we're A-type personalities more often than not, and that pressure is self-inflicted, but you can be sure that the majority of it comes from the working environment. So if you're a lead or a PM, you've probably never given anyone an explicit instruction to go home and use 20 non-existent personal hours to please research why PWA might be a clever idea for your project. Okay, but perhaps you were a bit short with them when they didn't have an answer to a left field question. You might have done a bit of this, bit of a sigh, whatever, they knew. And they walked away from that interaction feeling, at best, a bit of a dope, at worst, a complete failure. And you can be sure that they went home to spend hours that they should have been resting, making sure that they could meet your expectations next time round. Interestingly, IT is statistically right up there with the medical profession for burnout. It's the long hours, it's the deadline pressure, and it's the never-ending expectations for perfectly correct answers. And I guess the only difference is no one dies if we get it wrong, right? But you would swear otherwise the way some of our clients behave. By its very nature, it's probably impossible to eliminate the pace and the pressure from our industry completely. But it isn't impossible to manage it more constructively. And at the very least, make sure that the team environment isn't adding to the load. If you've worked for a dev for any length of time, you will know that managers and leads who are able to do that are pretty rare. I mean, not quite honest politician rare, but close. So feeling the need to capture and bottle some of this excellent manager magic, Google kicked off Project Oxygen in 2008. And they were aiming to qualify exactly what made a great manager in their environment. And this is what they found. You look at that list. You don't see know-it-all, inhuman, dictator, or despot. Interesting. Look at how many of those qualities have got nothing at all to do with hard technical skill and everything to do with understanding people. Project Oxygen found that teams with good managers, on average, were less stressed, less prone to burnout, and not surprisingly, more productive. A manager with a good level of empathy is better able to take the emotional temperature of a team and a client and communicate with all parties in a way that reduces stress and friction rather than increasing it. That means no barking orders at devs who are already anxious about looming deadlines, no passive-aggressive eye rolling when someone chose to get a good night's sleep, and no broken, burnt-out people crammed into a tech talk hoping for miracles. But it doesn't all hinge on the leader's EQ. The emotional intelligence of your team as a whole matters too. So not being satisfied with just having dipped a toe in the industrial psych field, Google tackled another project to look at the qualities that set apart their A-list teams. Project Aristotle. They covered 180 teams in Google, most of which were engineering, and they looked at 250 unique data points. They found that their A-list teams had these utterly earth-shattering things in common. Impact. Team members could see that their work made a difference. It didn't matter, actually, whether that difference was to an external customer, an internal customer, or just to their colleagues. People could find purpose in either the process or the output of what they were doing. Everyone in the team had a well-defined role, everyone knew exactly what was expected of them. And team members could rely on one another to deliver quality on time. So some real revelations in there, right? Absolute shockers. And actually nothing to do with EQ. I mean, those are things that are about decent leadership, good management, structure and process. But here comes the real kicker. It seems that the number one quality of an effective team is psychological safety. And this one has everything to do with the emotional intelligence of the entire team. The workers, the leaders, everyone. And it turns out it's a key differentiator for performance. The phrase itself, psychological safety, was coined by a Harvard Business School professor, Dr. Amy Edmondson, when she had studied the rate of human error in drug administration in a group of hospitals in the late 90s. She found that teams that were reporting the most errors were in fact the best performing. It's interesting stuff, that. So were these groups of people just like super well bonded because they were drowning their sorrows together every other night? Yeah, probably not. Great delivery is not usually preceded by a staggering hangover. So what was it that set those teams apart? The light bulb moment came when she realized that high-performing teams weren't actually making more mistakes than the others, which must have been kind of nice for their patients, right? Those teams were just more willing to talk about them. They were more willing to talk about them because in those groups, people felt comfortable taking risks and being honest about the outcome, good or bad. There was no shame in admitting a mistake or asking a question or offering a new idea. Pixar have long credited psychological safety for their success. In a tricky environment that is a blend of art and engineering, and where a perfect outcome is especially difficult to achieve, there is complete understanding that failure is a natural part of the process. No one gets hung out to dry for it. A team with a good level of emotional intelligence is well on its way to being psychologically safe. Empathy is the thing that prevents the blame game. Once you've put yourself in the other person's shoes, you know full well that you wouldn't want to be shamed for making that particular mistake either. Honest and frequent communication with the team as a whole is what closes the door on politics. If everyone is quote unquote in the know, there's no way for information to be used as a weapon. And that all sounds pretty cool, right? And sounds like stuff we should be quite good at, considering how often dev projects tank in our industry. You notice I said should. That headline is dated May 2018, AD, not BC. It wasn't a sensationalist headline either. That was exactly what they were fighting about. Classy. It's that sort of charming behavior that led to the launch of the compassionate coding movement. I can hear your eyes rolling. Stop there. Compassionate coding was founded by a pretty ordinary software engineer by the name of April Wenzel. And these days she describes herself as a recovering jerk programmer. Her career started in the competitive and, largely unhealthy space that is San Francisco software dev, where she very quickly acquired behaviors that would not make her mom proud. You'll recognize these. It's the disdain for tech and skills that she didn't rate, criticizing other people's work like it had been produced by a droid, not an actual human being. sorts of traits, I mean, first and foremost, they make for people who are pretty sucky to work with. And although that in itself doesn't cost money, the resultant conflicts in a team probably do. When people feel threatened, either through their own insecurity or because they're being attacked, they do lose the ability to work through issues rationally. And boy, can that turn your team into a bit of a powder keg. While compassionate coding and those sorts of movements, they aren't enough to crack the toxicity we see in our industry. I mean, they certainly promote a set of principles that allow team members to feel like they belong. And at their essence, are about making a team feel like a safe space. They're about teamwork. They're about continuous learning, inclusion, seniors who mentor rather than behave like rock stars, or worse, like 10x developers. Like, we've all worked with them. We admire them. When you're starting out, you aspire to be like them. These guys are the jack of all trades. They are a master of every single one. They work the longest hours. They produce the most code. They're always ready to rewrite the thing that did not quite make the grade. And you can see the appeal, right? Because if managing engineering teams is hard, building those teams is even harder. Who can resist the allure of hiring just a few of these godlike creatures? There's way less work than putting in place the structures that produce godlike teams. But are these 10x developers really all they're cracked up to be? I mean, you've seen it. How long did someone else in a team spend cleaning up the garbage that old Zeus there checked in at 2 a.m.? And come to think of it, your poor intern is still struggling with binding because instead of explaining how to do it right, old Zeus there just fixed it. And now that you're on a roll, you really wish that the dev manager would just listen to what the new guy has to say about UX instead of hanging on Zeus's every word. And are management blind to absolutely everything that goes on in this place? So imagine being able to tell your manager all those things that you're silently fuming about. Imagine as a manager being able to tell old Zeus there that the behaviors are causing more harm than good. Imagine being able to do one or both of those and still have your job and your team at the end. And I'm going to sound like a very Mark Ad, imagine no more. Part of the answer to this particular problem is what former Google exec Kim Scott calls radical candour. It's very straight feedback without annihilating the person. And she's so invested in the concept, she's written a book and started a business to train teams in how to do this. And it bends my head that someone is practically printing money off of something that we really shouldn't have to be taught, but here we are. So Scott aimed her model at leadership, but I think in our space, people at all levels of an organization are regularly asked to give feedback. I mean, whether that's performance reviews or more likely code reviews. So there's something in this for everyone. Let's take a look at it. On the y-axis, we have caring about the person who's receiving the feedback. We'll call that the give a damn axis. On the x-axis, we have the willingness to be honest. We'll call that the willing to piss people off axis. And up there, in the top right, we have the utopian radical candour, the perfect balance of caring and honesty. But what happens if you can't or don't get the balance of caring and direct communication quite right? Well, you might end up here. And actually, this is second prize. Because even if the person spends an hour crying in their car afterwards, they will at least have heard the feedback that they need to. It's nothing to aspire to, I might add, but after this, it gets progressively more dangerous. If you aren't going to be honest, and you don't care about the person who's getting feedback, like, what are you even doing there? And it's safe to say that you're running some kind of agenda. So, more caring is better? Should be, but interestingly, the worst mistakes happen up here. Ruinous empathy, where there's just so much caring and coddling and wrapping in of cotton wool that you never actually manage to deliver the feedback the person needs to hear. What it looks like in practice is this. Because when we don't want to give negative feedback, we tend to just avoid the conversation completely. And that is when you see the crazy. The lateral moves, the quiet shifting of project responsibilities until the person's job is basically about filling their coffee mug and answering the emails. So if we want to avoid 3 out of 4 messes, how exactly do you radical a candour? Well, it's pretty simple. When you give feedback, make sure it's humble. We are so bad at this. Yeah, we're often in a position where there isn't a whole lot of room for error. No, we do not have to morph into one of these 3 when dealing with our colleagues. It is entirely possible to be very knowledgeable about something without being a complete jackass. Linked to humility, if you're giving feedback, check your motives. Are you genuinely trying to help the other person, or are you just trying to prove that you know more? Consider too what you are actually telling them. Especially in the context of code review, telling someone that their approach is wrong, not so helpful. Explaining why and suggesting other approaches, much more helpful. Next on the list, timing. Like, I do not remember what I had for lunch yesterday. So the chances of me remembering the details of something work-related months after the fact are slim to none, and slim just left town. Give your feedback straight away or as close to the event as you can. It takes time, it takes effort, but it is so worthwhile. Think about it. If the person is doing something wrong, you give them the chance to correct that as soon as possible. If they're doing something right, you're encouraging them to continue. Remember too that no one should ever hear feedback, good or bad, for the first time in an annual review. So you're going to be humble and helpful and give your feedback straight away, but you're going to remember that feedback is like real estate. Location is everything. If you're praising, and if you can, do so in front of the whole team. Unless, of course, your code name is M, and you're running an MI6 team. In reverse, if you have to deliver some kind of criticism, do so as privately as possible. So you're out there and you're straightening up your halo because you've never called a teammate a half-wit in a meeting. You're going to have to dig a little bit deeper on this. If you think about it, the kinds of tools we use in our projects has moved code review from a 2-person interaction into basically public property. Be mindful of where to draw the line in a comment. If it will be helpful to the rest of the team, okay, go for it. If it is just about the other person's work, perhaps take it offline. And while we're remembering all of those things, watch out for what gets said in sprint and project retrospectives. People lose their inhibitions in those spaces in ways it's quite unbelievable. And since that manifesto hit our streets, I have seen so many degenerate into this, all because someone overlooked the last golden rule of radical candour. Play the game, not the player. Kim Scott tells quite a personal story from her time at Google when she talks about not making criticism a personal attack. And to set the scene, Scott and Sheryl Sandberg have just left a meeting at the height of AdSense's success. She tells it best, so I'll leave it to her.
So I sort of felt like the meeting went okay. After it was over, my boss said, why don't you walk back to my office with me? And I said, sure, sort of expecting a little bit of a victory lap. And she started telling me about the 4 or 5 things she liked about the presentation, how impressed she was with how the business was doing. But I was getting more and more nervous as we were walking because I sort of had a feeling the other shoe was about to drop. But I had no idea what I had done wrong. So this was an uncomfortable moment. And finally, she said, but, and I sort of held my breath, you said a lot. And I was like, oh, no big deal. I know I do that. It didn't really seem like, who cared if I said a lot when I had a tiger by the tail? So she said, was it because you were nervous? No, nervous, not me. And then she said, would it help if Google hired a speaking coach for you so that you could learn not to do this? And I said, I'm really busy. It just doesn't seem like the most important thing in the world. And she said, Kim, when you do that thing with your hand, I can tell I'm not really getting through to you. I'm going to have to be more clear here. When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid. That got my attention.
That feedback was incredibly direct, right? I mean, I would have been in my car with a tissue box, let's face it. But notice how at no point was it conveyed as you are stupid. I'm not going to add a whole lot more to this point, except to say that if you are giving feedback and you are starting with anything like with all due respect, or don't take this personally, but stop and reconsider what it is you're about to say, because there is a good chance you're about to go for the player. So, assuming you haven't called an emergency meeting or being outed as the imposter since I started talking, and in amongst all of this, something has resonated, how do you go about improving your own emotional intelligence at work? Start by paying closer attention to yourself and how you react in particular situations, particularly when you're under pressure. Do you bark at your colleagues? Do you withdraw from the team? Do you turn into the queen of sarcasm like I do? What can you do differently, better? And while you're paying attention to you, watch the people around you as well. No, not in the way that's going to get you arrested, please. Notice how your colleagues react to the things that you say and do. The already overwhelmed junior should be less stressed after a coaching session, not more so. The words you use really matter. I mean, regardless of how frequently or honestly you're communicating with the rest of your team, if your vocab gets people's backs up, your message will not be heard. It doesn't matter how serious or important or honest it is. But while you're being honest, be careful not to over-emote. Like, your project manager does not need to hear a severity 2 defect described as a disaster, even if that is your internal emotional temperature at the time. Admit to your mistakes and own them. Don't look for circumstantial excuses. Don't blame anyone else. Turns out that was really lousy for team morale. Apologize as loudly and as widely as you need to. Do what you can to correct the situation. Move on. This particular behavior is like yawning and smiling. It's so contagious, and it can improve the psychological safety of a team exponentially. Just to add, if you do that thing and your manager makes you the fall guy, you phone me. We've got jobs. Since the dawn of computer science, software engineers have been recruited on the assumption that excellent techies are inherently antisocial. We weren't looking for social skills of any kind, let alone emotional intelligence. And for the longest time, our environment fed and encouraged the idea that IQ trumps everything. Because when the problem is hard, IQ knows how to solve it. But our world has changed, and there is now not a single thing that we do which isn't about people. So when it comes to architecting the kind of interactions between people that creates a healthy, productive, and ultimately profitable workplace, continuing to believe that everything begins and ends with smart is in fact not so smart at all. Thank you.